We're joined by CBS News security analyst and former number 2 at the CIA, Michael Morell, former National Security Advisor to President Obama, Tom Donilon, and former Homeland Security Advisor to President George W. Bush, Fran Townsend. Mike, I want to start with you. You were in that chair a week ago. Where are we now relative to where we were last week?
So I think 4 things have happened in the last week. One is we've firmed up that the attack in Paris was indeed directed by the ISIS leadership in Raqqa. So it's a first directed attack in the West. 2, we have firmed up that a bomb did indeed bring down the Russian airliner over the Sinai. 3, we had a terrorist attack in Bamako, Mali, by al-Qaeda. And it's a very important reminder that al-Qaeda remains out there and in many ways just as dangerous, if not more dangerous than ISIS. And 4, we have what's ongoing in Brussels today, which is very clear to me that this was going to be another attack by the same group, a similar kind of attack. They raided an apartment this morning, found explosives, found weapons. So I think that's what we're looking at is a possible wave of attacks in Europe. John Brennan this week said that the Paris attack was the first in a pipeline of many.
All right, Michael Morell, Tom, and Fran, we will be back with all of you in a moment. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and then we'll be back with more of our panel in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. We're back now with CBS News security analyst Michael Morell, former National Security Advisor to President Obama, Tom Donilon, and former Homeland Security Advisor to President George W. Bush, Fran Townsend. Tom, I want to start with you. Give me your assessment of where things are now with the fight against ISIS.
Well, okay, and we'll take into account the points that Michael made. I think that the terror threat has evolved and metastasized. You know, we undertook a very aggressive effort through 2 administrations against al-Qaeda. Had a lot of success with respect to that, but this is now, as I said, evolved and metastasized. I think we're in a new and more dangerous phase with respect to the terror threat against the West and the United States. I think that's manifested itself in ISIS moving from a focused agenda around building a so-called caliphate in the area of Iraq and Syria to an external agenda. And I think that's what we've seen. You know, since they basically announced they were going to do this since last August, they've been, by my count, have launched attacks in 10 countries, and just in the last few weeks, we've seen attacks at Sharm el-Sheikh, in Beirut, and then in Paris, which have resulted in the loss of life of 400 people just in the last few weeks. So we are in a new and more dangerous phase, John.
Fran, what do you make of this new phase?
Well, and I think what it underscores, to Tom's point, is that you can't have a multi-pronged approach to fighting ISIS any longer. This notion of the president's agenda of having Iraq first before Syria, I think what you're seeing is the global threat is emanating out of Syria. You must have a Syria first policy now. You must, in order to disrupt the global threat. And I think that really is now underscored by the emanation of this threat, as Tom points out, in places around the world and the loss of life.
I just want to add that for me, who lived through the pre-9/11 years, there's a similarity here that's a bit frightening to me. You have a group who says it wants to attack us, just as bin Laden said he wanted to attack us. You have them building that capability, just as bin Laden built it. We don't have great visibility into that capability, just as we did not do then. They have the single most important advantage, a safe haven, building that capability. And we just had a major attack overseas, embassy bombings in 1998, Paris now. That should be a wake-up call. The similarities are very concerning.
To that point, I mean, I really do think you've got to say to yourself, if we learned anything from 9/11, you got to do today what you would do post an attack, and do it now before the attack.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. But it's different and even more complicated, Michael, than that period. I agree with a lot of the points you made. We have seen a systemic breakdown in state authority in the Arab Middle East, which has allowed these large swaths of ungoverned territory to emerge, into which these groups have filled the vacuum. That's a different circumstance in terms of the amount of space that these groups have to operate from. And one of the lessons, of course, out of 9/11 is giving these groups operational space, like they had in Afghanistan, is a dangerous thing to do for us. And the numbers are a lot bigger with respect to potential pools of terrorists. And last, and Michael's made this point in other forums, the speed with which this organization, ISIS, has recruited and organized itself is substantially faster than al-Qaeda.
That was Senator Feinstein's point about speed, pace here.
Right.
Mike, though, if to Fran's point, do today what we will do tomorrow after an attack, what does that list look like?
This is the big challenge. I mean, it really is the big challenge. You know, the lesson learned of 9/11 was, can we as a nation act before we get attacked, right? And that is very difficult. President Roosevelt could not bring the American people along to intervene in World War II until we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. So it is very difficult for a president to bring a nation along to say, let's act now to disrupt what we know is going to happen.
And Tom, this is a president who you served, who's in his 7th year, came in promising to pull troops out. I mean, does he have the energy for this fight if it calls for much more?
Well, he certainly has, certainly, and the circumstances have evolved and changed as we've been discussing. And there are a number of things that need to be done. And both the President and the Secretary of Defense have said that the effort needs to be intensified in Syria and in Iraq, to Brandon's point, especially in Syria. It is critical for us to break the narrative of success of this organization. And to do that, you need some victories, including taking down their capital in Raqqa, Syria. And I do think we will head towards having more direct support for these efforts by American Special Operations Force.
But to do that, the president would have to acknowledge that the current strategy is failing, right? In order to revitalize and intensify it, you'd have to acknowledge, right, that what we're doing isn't producing the results fast enough. To Mike's point, it has to have a sense of urgency.
There's two things we have to accomplish here to squeeze these guys and degrade these guys. One is we have to put pressure on them in the safe haven and shrink the safe haven. Right? That's lesson learned number 1 of defeating Al-Qaeda in South Asia. Lesson number 2 is you got to remove the leadership in rapid succession. Right? Those are the 2 things you have to accomplish.
Tom, if dealing in Syria with ISIS requires getting Assad out of the way, it seems to me this tension with Assad, the U.S. wants him gone, the Russians don't. Isn't that a hurdle over which we need that needs to be cleared to get some real progress?
Well, it's a hurdle, but I don't think that should stand in the way of the military and other operations, frankly, that we can launch working in a more intensive way. I don't know if it's to acknowledge failure, but it's a new phase. I do think there's a new and more dangerous phase here that requires new and additional steps. So I would not have the effort to take down ISIS, right, and to take Raqqa and to support directly the Kurdish and Arab forces in Syria. I would not have that be held up in any way by the political process, which has to go on in parallel, but it shouldn't be an obstacle to our pursuit. Now, in the Russians have an interest here in defeating ISIS. They have hundreds, if not thousands, of Russians who have come into this fight from the Caucasus and from Russia. They had 224 Russian citizens killed in this airline attack coming out of Sharm el-Sheikh, and we believe by ISIS in the Sinai. To date, they haven't put their focused effort on this, and that should be a test for them here, right, as to whether they can get themselves to act here in coordination with the rest of the international community against ISIS.
Fran, I want to ask about your Homeland Security expertise. The big conversation this week about Syrian refugees. What's your take on how much of a threat that is, how the administration's handled the debate?
You know, really interesting to me, John, the president has made an impassioned humanitarian argument, but if he really cares, and I believe he does really care about the refugees, he's not made the most persuasive, which is the national security argument. To not bring the refugees in, right? You leave these people in desperate circumstances, and you cede the battlefield that are the refugee camps to the recruitment of ISIS, Al-Qaeda over the long term, and you leave those potential new recruits to our children and grandchildren to fight generations later. The second thing is we've had real trouble getting good human intelligence off the ground in Syria. These people are fleeing ISIS, and they represent a real opportunity at gathering human intelligence as you take them in. The other thing is I don't understand the Republicans' point of view. After all, the Republicans have allowed themselves to be painted as anti-refugee, when I think what they're trying to articulate and say is we're anti-ISIS, we're anti-Al-Qaeda, and they're using the refugees to insert themselves. What we want to do is focus on that. Both sides seem to be sort of almost intentionally talking past each other, and there really is a rational middle ground.
Mike, I want to ask you about this notion of rules of engagement. Do you get the sense that things have changed in terms of the pace or the way in which the U.S. is taking the fight to ISIL? In my reporting, there's a lot of people who've said there's a real concern about collateral damage, and that has blocked some of the activities. Has that changed, do you think?
I don't believe it's changed. There's very strict rules of engagement with regard to human collateral and environmental damage from attacking oil wells, for example. I think that's something we need to look at. The law of war allows for collateral damage as long as it's proportional to the military gain. We've had very strict standards for some really important purposes, but I think we need to look at that.
I think you'll see an intensification on that, and I think a number of new efforts will be taken in order to pressure ISIS. I want to go to Fran's point on the refugees, so it's an important point. The most difficult way to get into the United States is to declare yourself a refugee and go through the screening process, right? It's not a large number with respect to the Syrians, and it takes 18 to 24 months. But we do have real homeland security issues with respect to Europe, I think. Fran, you'd agree. In that Europe has real flaws in its external border control, in its intelligence sharing, in its airline passenger lists, and we need to insist that the Europeans clean this up. And the way to do that, I think, is through pressure through our visa waiver program, which is to say, clean it up or don't participate.
Great. Last word to you, Tom. Thanks all of you very much for being with us. We'll be back in a moment. We're back now with Republican presidential candidate and Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, who got stuck in that Midwest snowstorm yesterday and joins us from Chicago. We're glad to have you, Senator. Let me start with this refugee question where we left off in the conversation here. You had some efforts this week to block Syrian refugees and people from other countries that you thought were dangerous. But in the conversation today, the worry, it seems to be from experts, is more about the visa waivers, which is to say people who could come in through Europe, these countries where you don't need the kind of screening that you would have with refugees. Why isn't that the bigger problem?
Well, I think it's all of the above. My bill would have addressed refugees, students, visitors, and those who want to immigrate from countries that have significant jihadist movements. But even just isolating on the refugee thing for a moment, we had 2 Iraqi refugees come to my hometown, Bowling Green, Kentucky, and then proceeded to want to buy Stinger missiles. Turns out one of them had fingerprints in our database system because he had his fingerprints on a bomb fragment from Iraq, and yet we didn't catch him. So this was just a couple of years ago. We were not vetting refugees adequately. The Boston bombers also came here as refugees and became radicalized. So I think that for the president to say there's no danger is incorrect. But I do agree with those who say the visa waiver program is a problem. There are many French citizens who want to attack their government and attack us, and we have no program for screening them. I say they should all come in through global entry, sort of a frequent flyer program where you have to get a background check or they have to wait 30 days. Right now we have nothing in place, and I think we are at a great deal of risk from a variety of sources, refugees, but also visa waiver nations.
You have consistently been cautioning your party about overseas military involvements, and you've said on these issues, be strong in the homeland to keep them from coming in. But has the growth of ISIS changed your mindset in terms of this argument that you got to go get them there? You've got to fight ISIS in Iraq and Syria, degrade them in their operating space so that they don't even get a chance to come to America?
I think the first thing we have to do is learn from our history. In the past several decades, if there's one true thing in the Middle East, it's that when we've toppled secular dictators, we've gotten chaos and the rise of radical Islam. So by toppling Saddam Hussein, we're still suffering that chaos. By toppling Gaddafi in Libya, we got chaos, a failed state, and a third of Libya now pledges allegiance to ISIS. By pouring weapons into the Syrian civil war, on the side of Islamic rebels who were actually allied with Al-Qaeda and some of whom became ISIS, that was a mistake. So the ultimate solution, if we want a long-lasting victory and a long-lasting peace, what we're going to have to do is the boots on the ground are going to have to be Arab, and you're going to have Sunni Muslims defeating Sunni Muslims, because even the Shiite Muslims can't occupy these Sunni cities. ISIS is essentially surrounded, but what we have to do is we do need a ceasefire in Syria, and probably Russia is going to be part of that solution if we're willing to talk with them. But we also need to engage Turkey on one side. We need to engage the Kurds on one side. We need to get the Baghdad army to become less of a sectarian Shiite army. And when you include significant Sunnis in that army, when they go into the lands that have been captured by ISIS, then it will be Sunni Muslims coming into those towns and recapturing them. Nothing else is really ever going to cause a lasting victory.
Let me come back to the homeland here for a moment. You have been very careful about stopping overreach in terms of U.S. surveillance. We've had some talk this morning about encryption being the big backdoor, the way these terrorists can communicate. What's your sense of how much do you worry that there will be an overreach in terms of additional surveillance operations?
I'm very worried about that because I think when you have a fearful time or an angry time that people are coaxed into giving up their liberty. Already many in the intelligence community are saying, oh, if we only had the bulk phone collection program back. Well, what they're not telling you and what they're being dishonest about is we still have the phone collection program. In the United States, all phone records are still being collected all the time, and we still had the attack. And realize that in France, They have bulk collection or surveillance of their citizens 1,000-fold greater than what we have, with very little privacy protections. They still didn't know anything about this. So what I would argue is that you can keep giving up liberty, but in the end, I don't think we'll be safer, but we may have lost who we are as a people in the process. And I'm going to fight to make sure that doesn't happen.
In the last 20 seconds, surveillance of mosques. Do you put that in the same category in terms of overreach to answer this threat?
If you're going to do surveillance to religious institutions, yes. I think surveillance, though, has a fairly low threshold for individuals. And I think the discussion should be, will we have surveillance? Will we follow people who we think are at risk? That's even a lower threshold than getting a search warrant. So, yes, we should follow people who are at risk. Should we talk to their neighbors and friends? Should we talk to their imam? Sure, all of that is legitimate. But should we target mosques and have a database of Muslims? Absolutely not. And I think that's really disqualifying for both Donald Trump and Marco Rubio to say that we're going to close down every place that potentially has a discussion that might lead to extremism. That would require some sort of religious czar that I think isn't consistent with our freedom.
All right, Senator Rand Paul, thanks so much for being with us. We'll be right back with our new Battleground Tracker poll results and our political panel. We're back with new results from our CBS News Battleground Tracker. In Iowa, the ground has shifted. Donald Trump is still in first. He's out front with 30%. But Ted Cruz is picking up momentum and is now at 21%. Ben Carson has dropped to 19%, down 8 points from last month. After Carson, Marco Rubio comes in at 11%. The next candidate is Jeb Bush with 5%. And Carly Fiorina is at 4%. The rest of the field comes in with 2% or lower. In New Hampshire, again, it's Donald Trump on top with 32%. Marco Rubio has made gains there and is now at 13%. Ben Carson drops to 10%, where he's joined with Ted Cruz. John Kasich comes in at 8%. Jeb Bush, Rand Paul, and Carly Fiorina are all bunched up at 6%, with Chris Christie at 5% support. The rest of the field is at 1% or less. South Carolina is all Donald Trump, too. He's at 35%. Carson is at 19%. Rubio close behind there with 16%. Senator Cruz at 13%. Jeb Bush comes in with 5%, and the rest of the field is at 3% or less. We want to take a closer look at some of those numbers with our political panel. Ruth Marcus is a columnist at The Washington Post. Karl Rove was the top political advisor to George W. Bush for many years, and he's out with a new book, The Triumph of William McKinley, Why the Election of 1896 Still Matters. And Ron Brownstein is the editorial director at Atlantic Media. Ron, I want to start with you. Ben Carson slips 8 points in Iowa. What does that mean to you? Well,
I think, Carson has faced, a lot of questions about whether he's up for the job. And I think as you get closer, those loom larger. I mean, talking about these polls in general, I think Donald Trump, for whatever reason, polls a little better in online-only polls like this than we see otherwise. He was at 22 in a Boston Globe poll today in New Hampshire. But having said that, there's no question that he's in a strong position and that this shift toward the nexus of immigration and terrorism is good terrain for him in a Republican primary. I would say the Republican race still boils down to two sentences. Donald Trump is consolidating the blue-collar wing of the Republican Party. He's at 41% nationally in the ABC Washington Post today among non-college Republicans, and the college plus, the more white-collar wing, remains fractured. He's at 23 there. No one is really consolidating that. The question is, does the race look different at any point when someone eventually does consolidate that wing? Because it does not look like Donald Trump is going anywhere with his support in the more blue-collar populist part of the party.
Karl Rove, your assessment of the Republican field, and has it changed after Paris?
I think it has changed after Paris. Your guest on earlier, Senator Rand Paul, is going to suffer in the new environment, as is, I believe, Ben Carson, who is an admirable person but unable to answer these questions. Donald Trump, what's interesting to me is it doesn't matter. Here's the man who was saying, in essence, leave ISIS up to Putin to handle. It's really no concern of ours, and now we're going to bomb the expletive out of him. So it really doesn't matter to him. Ron made the point that he's strong, and relative to the rest of the field, he is strong, but he has a high floor and a low ceiling. Right. And what's going to be hard is for him to move out of where he is. The rest of the field is beginning to consolidate around the notion of it shouldn't and cannot and must not be Trump. And that's bad news for him long haul, and maybe good news for the two people in the polls that were moving, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio.
Let me ask you about Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. If it's a conversation about ISIS and Homeland Security threats, in our Battleground Tracker poll, we asked the Commander-in-Chief question. Ted Cruz comes in, 67% think he is ready to be Commander-in-Chief, 51% think Marco Rubio. Now, that may just be affection translating into another question, but on this question of Commander-in-Chief, explain to me what people are thinking when they look at this. Do they want somebody who's just talking strength, or do they want somebody who can talk about the geographic complexity and the different groups fighting?
I don't think they know what they want. I don't think they know what they mean when it comes down to specific candidates. They want somebody who seems, quote, presidential in nature, somebody who seems to have a command of foreign policy, who says things that make them feel that they know what they're doing. And look, let's put something else in perspective. We may think we're close because we're going to start voting the 1st of February, but we are a long, long way away from this. In Iowa in 2008, over a third of the voters made up their minds in literally the closing days of the contest. It used to be in 1999 and 2000 when we were voting on literally the 2nd of January that people began to consolidate after Thanksgiving. But now we're going to be doing it a month later. We're likely to see several different changes here, and the deeper people get a sense of what it is they specifically want, the deeper their likelihood is to be the link with a particular candidate.
And John, I spent last Sunday with at evangelical churches around Des Moines and in Ames, and it really reinforces what Carl said and what the findings of your poll were. People were still then taking account and digesting the lessons of Paris. A lot of the people I talked to were still saying nice things about Dr. Carson, but the second person they mentioned was Ted Cruz. And so I think the emergence of Ted Cruz in these polls and the potential emergence of Marco Rubio in New Hampshire kind of tells you the shape of this race going forwards.
Do you think Democrats are going to have any opportunity to exploit some of the things Republicans have said with respect to these refugees? There's a lot of outcry on the left, but does that last to the general?
I think it does last to the general. I have to say this week I've been nostalgic for the good old days of George W. Bush and his soothing, calming, responsible words about Muslims after the 9/11 attacks. This was a very ugly week for Republicans in terms of their response on refugees. And I think it was something that was exacerbated really by the failure of President Obama to explain to people that they weren't crazy to be nervous, but to understand their nervousness and to explain it away.
Karl Rove has to respond to the
to
the praise from the left, which could be considered an attack.
I'm going to ignore the praise from the left and just say, if President Obama had said, you know what, Speaker Ryan, you're right. We need to tap the brakes. Let's do what you suggest, what you and a significant number of Democrats suggest. I mean, this was a veto-proof vote out of the House of Representatives. If he had said, you know what, Senate Leader McConnell, take that bill up, get it passed, and I'm going to sign it, and we'll tap the brakes and put in place the things that will require these people to certify. It would not take long, I suspect, for him to make what necessary changes there were, and it would have been a confidence-building measure. The president is exploiting this for politics. He doesn't really care about the practicality.
Two very quick points. One is that I think the uproar over the refugees has to be seen as the continuation of a debate that has been going on in the Republican primary about whether undocumented immigrants and the borders are basically a threat to your safety. And I think this is a big theme we're going to see running through. Having said that, I think the more important line in the end than what happens to the 10,000 Syrian refugees is whether we're talking about tens of thousands of American troops. And I think the dividing line that Hillary Clinton put down this week, where she is saying still no large-scale American ground force, may ultimately be a more important point of separation with the Republican nominee next year than this question of what to do with the refugees today.
Last 20 seconds, Ruth, on Hillary Clinton. Burdened more by connection to the Obama administration and what some people perceive as a failure on ISIS, or help for her because she knows this terrain in terms of the issue terrain here?
I think it's a mixed bag. People who aren't going to vote for any Democrat aren't going to vote for her anyway. But I think, especially in the contrast with Bernie Sanders, a benefit, and in the long-term benefit.
All right, sorry to Ruth.
Yeah.
Thanks all of you. We'll see you again next week, Mr. Rove, for our presidential authors panel. Thanks all of you for joining us. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.